Please take out this handout so you can follow along with the lesson. In this lesson, we're going to cover a topic called simple interest. This is the very first topic in our series on personal finances. In Spiral 1, we're only going to be talking about simple interest, and then in Spiral 2, we will continue talking about interest in more detail, and then in Spirals 3 and 4, we will look at applications such as purchasing a vehicle and credit cards. But for now, we need to get our minds wrapped around the basic idea of interest. You can think of interest as the cost of borrowing money. For example, if you lend me $100 and I don't pay it back for a while, you'll probably expect me to give you back the original $100 that I borrowed, plus maybe a little extra because you had to wait so long. That's kind of the idea of interest. It's that extra cost, the cost of borrowing the money. Now, there's two different perspectives on interest. And so I'm going to talk about when you borrow money and when you put money in the bank. So when I say the bank, I mean a traditional bank, an online bank, a credit union, any financial institution. I'm just simplifying by saying the bank. So the first perspective is when you borrow money. So when you borrow money, the bank is lending you money, so you owe them interest. Now, when you put money in the bank, you are lending the bank money, so they owe you interest. So those are two different perspectives on interest when it comes to banking. You're either borrowing money from the bank and then you have to pay back interest, or you're putting money into your bank account and the bank will owe you interest. So a lot of people don't really realize or think about the fact that banks are businesses, so they need a way of making money to make a profit. So when you put your money into an investment, the bank is actually using your money for their own investments so that they can make a profit. And so that's what I mean by you're lending the bank money. Now, of course, they're going to pay you back with interest, just like you pay them back with interest when you borrow the bank's money. Now, of course, when you borrow money, you have to pay higher interest usually to the bank than they pay you. If you have a bank account, take a look at your bank statements or your bank account information and see if you're getting paid interest each month. You should get an interest payment from the bank. It's usually only a few cents or maybe even $1 at most, but every month you should be getting an interest payment, and that's the bank paying you for use of your money. Now, there's two ways to calculate interest. There's simple interest and compound interest. We're going to leave compound interest for Spiral 2. This is probably the more common way that banks use to calculate interest, but it's more complicated than simple interest. So we're going to start with basics. We're just going to start with simple interest for this lesson and Spiral 1. But just keep in mind there is a different kind of interest calculation that we will look at a later date. So let's talk about simple interest. Simple interest is calculated only on the original amount borrowed. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I want to contrast these two ideas of simple and compound interest. Let's say I borrow $100 from you, and you're charging me 1% interest per week. So that means every week I don't pay you back the full amount. I owe you 1% of what I borrowed. So if it's simple interest, every week I don't pay you back, I owe you $1. So if I take a week to pay you back, I owe you the original $100 plus $1. That's the 1% interest. If I take 2 weeks, then I'll owe you the original $100 plus another $2. That's the interest. If I take 3 weeks, I owe you $3 extra. If I take 4 weeks, I owe you $4 extra. Now, that's simple interest. Compound interest would be calculated on top of the interest already calculated. So let's say I have compound interest and I borrow $100 and you're charging me 1% compounded every week. Well, I borrowed $100. After 1 week, I owe you another dollar. So now I owe you $101. The next week, if I still haven't paid you back, I owe you 1% of the $101. So that's another $1.01. So now I owe you $102.01. And now, if I don't pay you back for another week, I owe you another 1% of that $102.01. So it just grows more and more every week. It's not just another dollar every week. It's $1 the first week, then it's $1.01 more the next week, then it's another $1.02 more, then it just keeps building more and more every week. So I'll go into that more detail in Spiral 2, but compound interest, you're getting charged interest on top of interest on top of interest. Simple interest is just calculated on the original amount borrowed. I'll leave it at that. So to calculate simple interest, there's a formula. I equals PRT. Now all these letters represent something. I is the interest accumulated, P is the principal, R is the interest rate per year, and T is the time in years. So to calculate the amount of interest owing, you take the principal, that's the original amount of money. You multiply that by the interest rate as a decimal, and you multiply that by the time in years. That will tell you the amount of interest that you owe. So if I borrowed $100, the interest rate was 1%, I would multiply it by 0.01. And if it's for a year, then I multiply it by another 1. Or if it's 2 years, I multiply it by 2. Now, if I borrow money, I don't just owe the interest when I pay it back. I have to pay the principal as well. So the amount owing, or the amount due that you have to pay back, is A, and that's equal to the principal, the original amount you borrowed, plus I, the interest that accumulated over that span of time. Now, we're going to use these equations in the following examples, and hopefully by the end, it'll make a little more sense. Determine the simple interest if $500 is invested for 5 years at an annual interest rate of 6%. Well, my formula is I equals PRT. P is the principal, that's the amount borrowed or the original amount invested, that's $500. Multiply that by R, the interest rate, well that's 6%, so 0.06. And T is the time in years, that's 5 years. So I just plug that in my calculator, 500 times 0.06 times 5. That works out to $150 in interest. Question 2. Determine the simple interest if $12,500 is invested for 7.5 years with an interest rate of 8.6% per year. Pause the video and try this question on your own, and then come back and see how you did. It works out to $8,062.50. Make sure you did this part correctly. Some trouble spots that people sometimes have are they would put 0.86 instead of 0.086. Just be careful. It's not 86%, it's 8.6%. So you have to have that 0 in front. Another issue that I just want to talk about here is if you wrote 8,062.5, well, mathematically that's correct, but just for communication, since we're talking about dollars, you want to have 2 digits after the decimal. So instead of just 0.5, it's 0.50 to show that there's 50 cents. Next one, Bob invested $2,000 into an account that earns 7% simple interest. How much total money will he have in 2.5 years? Notice it's not asking how much interest will he get after 2.5 years. It's how much total money will he have? So the total amount of money, that's A. We're solving for A. Now remember, A is P plus I, so we still need to find the interest, but we just don't want to stop with that. So we'll do the same formula, I equals PRT, plug in our numbers, solve, but then we have to remember that we're looking for the total amount of money that he will have. So that's A equals P plus I. So we have to add the principal, the $2,000, to the interest that we just calculated. So that gives us an answer of $2,350. That's the total amount of money he'll have after 2.5 years. Tyler borrowed $3,550. The lender charges simple interest at a rate of 10.3% per year. If Tyler pays the loan in 100 days, how much will he owe in total? You can try this on your own, but just be careful. Remember, when you're calculating interest, T is the time in years, not days. So you're going to have to change days to years. Well, it's really not as hard as it sounds. You just set this up as a fraction. There's 365 days in a year, so this is 100 over 365. That's how much it is in a year. So try this one on your own and then check back in to see how you did. I equals PRT. P is the principal. He borrowed $3,550. R is the interest rate, 10.3%. That's 0.103. And T is the time in years. Well, it's 100/365 of a year. 3,550 times 0.103 times 100 divided by 365 gets you $100.18 if you round properly. Add that to the principal and you get $3,650.18. That's how much he will owe in total. If you have questions about any of these examples or just the formulas in general for simple interest, let me know and I'll help you out. Otherwise, move on to the practice questions on the next page, and they're all based on similar questions as I have here.